the most important thing in a person's life is of how much he applies the standard of God's ideal of creation, being our Creator and having had a purpose in creating us. One must understand how to apply it in daily life in accordance with the teachings of the Bible and live life personally together with God, otherwise even the most religious person may come to envy the freedom that there is in Satan's world and the ability to sin freely. Practicing the standard of God's ideal of creation in your life means above all that you show the same kind of heart toward people with whom you come into contact as the one you have toward God. Being loyal to God means, above all, also being able to treat each person as his son and daughter. It is important that we look at situations and ourselves from God's point of view, not from our own unique, self-centered point of view. This then becomes your best preparation to live in the high levels in the spiritual world of God's kingdom. This maturity of heart with God you develop especially in times of your spiritual emptiness, if you know how to accept it and not fill it with so many artificial, and especially satanic, things and situations that have nothing to do spiritually with God and His ideal. You have to be free with God to relate personally, and allow Him to personally relate freely with you and to guide you. Often a life too centered on religious canons does not allow us to experience this freedom with God. But remember that religious life was created by God to bring man closer to Himself after he had drifted away from Him, and especially to make him develop spiritual senses, which enable him to interact with God and the spiritual world. Spiritual senses that after the sin of Adam and Eve, remained at an embryonic level and stifled. God created us by giving us free will and free will within the framework of His laws and ideal, but this freedom is unfortunately used by Satan to make us choose and accept evil and sin in our lives, even with deception, and knowing that God cannot interfere anyway in accordance with a principle He Himself established in His ideal. Being able to go free toward God and live your life with Him is the best path of growth in the path of the ideal of creation. Once you have acquired a good relationship with God and a good standard of heart with God, you must carry that standard of heart and love into your daily life, in the environment in which you live. Family, work, society. Jesus, and so many people who have lived with God in history, have lived this standard. Even though Jesus was tortured and crucified, He continued to care for God and people with a heart of love toward God and forgiveness toward the world. You therefore do not have to be buried anyway by the environment in which you live or freely follow every kind of thought that goes through your head, of good or evil. Satan and the negative spiritual world will always try to make you choose evil and turn away from God, because we have a fallacious nature, fallen in ourselves. We are a mixture of good and evil. The Apostle Paul himself said he was a prisoner of a law of sin in himself, which made him a slave to sin, even though he did not want to be. But why do we have to live a life with a godly spiritual standard? In order to go and live in a spiritual world that belongs exclusively to God, not in a spiritual level that is also in the spiritual world, a mixture of good and evil, as here on earth, a place where there is God, but also Satan. You are living in this fallen world, where Satan is the God, as the Bible says. And he can influence us directly or indirectly through so many people, environments and situations. You must try to live in accordance to your original mind, and practice the standard of the ideal of creation, with God in your daily life.